Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Kurama and Naruto Swapped Places, Kurama Conqueror Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. In order to understand me, you need to understand what I am. I am Kurama, the strongest and eldest of the Biju, the nine-tailed fox as the humans called me. My father, Hagoromo Otsutsuki, created myself and my 8 siblings as part of a whole. A whole that must never be allowed to form again. As a part of a whole, the only ones that were ever able to understand me were my siblings, and that understanding was incomplete, and that was the polite way of putting it. This story started over 1200 years ago and it is not a pleasant tale. My story truly starts on the day our father died. On his deathbed, he asked us to guide humanity toward the path of Ninshu. Ninshu was my father's belief that chakra could bring humans together in a shared understanding that would lead to the betterment of the world. As my siblings and I tried to figure out the best way to do this, we decided that we would each take a domain in the lands we live in. These lands were called the elemental nations and we separated to spread Ninshu and watch over humanity. My family was unorthodox at best and downright miserable to deal with at worst. As I came to find out, this is not a trait unique to Biju families, but is perhaps the definition of family. That being said, I suppose, as the eldest, I should introduce my siblings. I will start with my littlest brother, Shukaku, the one-tailed sand tanuki. He is an ornery bastard on the best of days and psychotic on the worst. It is not entirely his fault for he was treated the worst of any of my brethren. For the duration of this story, he resided in Kase no Kuni, the land of wind. My youngest sister, the two-tailed hellcat Matabi, the Nibi no Nekomata as the humans call her, was my favorite sibling. Her and I often had a shared understanding that led to something akin to love. The day of my greatest rage was the day she was first sealed in a human. She was gifted to the human hidden village of the Hidden Cloud. That is the shinobi village of Kaminari no Kuni, or Lightning Country. My brother, the three-tailed turtle, Isobu, was the most chill of the Biju and he also liked to spend most of his time by himself in the ocean. All he genuinely wanted to do was laze about and idly watch over the humans. For one that wished to remain isolated from humanity, he probably interacted with it the most. He also formed a relationship with one clan that truly understood my father's ideologies. Unfortunately, after his sealing, they met a tragic end. He resided in Mizu no Kuni and was once again gifted to the hidden village of Kurigakure. My proudest brother, Son Goku, was a four-tailed lava ape. He was proud by nature, and he controlled the lava of the earth. He was responsible for guardianship of the northwestern region that later came to be known as Tasuki no Kuni. As such, when he was captured, he was gifted to the hidden village of the stone, Iwagakure. He remained proud and obstinate to the end and that was something I came to respect greatly about him. My swiftest brother that was a free spirit. He was Kokuo, the five-tailed dolphin horse and he was the happiest when he was on the run. Over fields, over oceans and around the world Kokuo ran. I always admired that about him. Unfortunately, he too was caught and gifted to Iwagakure with Son Goku. Once denied his freedom, he became an untamable stallion that was obstinate until the end. Saiken was my most unique sibling and I often wondered what father was thinking when he created her. She was a six-tailed slug that had master over acid. Her acid was potent enough to wound me when we fought, although she was generally a fun-loving entity. As with my other siblings, she was caught and gifted to Kurigakure alongside Isobu. Chome, the seven-tailed horned beetle, was the peacemaker within the family. She was overly cheerful, and she was the sole member of the family gifted with flight. She had domain over insects and was hailed as the queen of the insects. Alas, this did not save her from the damnable human, and she was gifted to Takigakure. She maintained her positive attitude and still did her best to follow her father's teachings. Next, We have the brother nearest to power with me, and perhaps that was why I butted heads with him the most. Yuki, the eight-tailed octopus, was a hybrid of a minotaur's upper body and an octopus lower body. He often hung out with the Titan turtle within the oceans around Lightning Country. He was the last to get captured, and he was the one who fought hardest against his containment, at first. He and I would only come to understand one another much, much later in my life. Finally, you have me. You best not have forgotten my introduction already, pathetic ninjas. I resided in Fire Country and watched over humanity with disgust for most of my life. I saw only the evil that humanity was capable of, and only hatred, anger and disgust grew in my chakra core for over 1,000 years. As if that were not bad enough, after all of my siblings were captured, I was enslaved. The humans finally crossed the line with me and fixed my hatred for humanity so deep in my core that it became an essential part of my chakra. Madara Uchiha, using the powerful eyes of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, he enslaved me and robbed me of my own will. Why my father granted mortal men the ability to control us confounded me for the longest time. Madara used me in a simple squabble between himself and his rival. The descendants of the Uchiha and Senju fought and squabbled in the same manner that my father's human sons did. That is how I went from enslaved to sealed away. Madara was defeated by Hashirama, and the victor's wife sealed me into herself. This began my 87 years of captivity, and it only served to confirm my hatred. I would find out later in life that Hagoromo's sons imprinted themselves on the chakra cycles of their ancestors, and this was the reason for the repeated squabbles. This caused the mayhem known as the Warring Clan era that lasted for hundreds of years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. This era only ended because of the same humans that I mentioned above. They created villages and gathered clans. These villages worked within nations. Then, suddenly, it was all-out war rather than clan squabbles. The world was rocked by 3 great wars before my story truly starts. The wars were fought for petty reasons, and they left nothing but carnage, chaos and hatred in their wake. Each village imagined itself the victor or the victim. Each village claimed that their cause was just and cared nothing for the loss of life. The cycle of hatred escalated within the village system for nearly a century before the one my father spoke of arrived. I stood vindicated in my beliefs as humans enslaved us, jailed us and stole our power. They did this by sealing us into other humans that they dubbed Jinchuriki, literally defined as the power of human sacrifice. They took our power and called it their own to use us as weapons of war that perpetrated the cycle of hatred. Yet another reason that my soul seared with hatred for this pathetic race. I had 2 Jinchuriki that treated me indifferently before my story truly starts. I already introduced the first as Uzumaki Mito. She was a decent woman, and she understood my father's art of fuinjutsu better than any human I knew. She interacted with me minimally and never took my chakra. She gave birth to a son and daughter and was able to prevent my escape during both of those pregnancies. Other than the fact that I was imprisoned within her for 68 years, I could begrudgingly respect her for her purity and love of family. My next Jinchuriki was Uzumaki Kushina, officially a niece of Uzumaki Mito, daughter of Uzumaki Krishna, and I care not to share her true father's name. She was the rightful princess of Whirlpool Country as well as one of its last surviving members. She was wild, brash, passionate and impulsive, but her soul was pure and good. Keep in mind that I do not give such compliments lightly. Kushina interacted with me every now and then, but she was only taught the bigotry and mistrust of the human race when it came to dealing with us Biju. Can I blame her? No, I cannot. By that time, I was so enraged and saturated with hatred that my chakra became poisonous to most humans. So, in hindsight, I do not blame her for her mistrust. She took my chakra only when absolutely needed, and other than that, she left me well enough alone. That all changed on the night that she gave birth to her one and only son. I was ripped from the seal by a cursed Uchiha during her moment of weakness. Against my will, I was once again enslaved to the Sharingan I after I was ripped out of her. The Uchiha ordered me to attack the Hidden Leaf village and I caused havoc until I was defeated and sealed once more. The mortal that sealed me fought well and died honorably. I may hate him, but I do honor his strength and sacrifice. The mortal, Namikaze Minato, defeated me by sealing my entity into his only son, Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. This man was supposedly an orphan, but that was only a smokescreen to cover one of the last of the Senju clan. This scheme was concocted by crafty and greedy mortals that only thought of their own gain. Minato was the direct descendant born from Hashirama Senju's son Dan Senju and Tsunade Senju. I only share this with you because it is relevant to the story. My final Jinchuriki was a boy known to the world as Uzumaki Naruto and his fate was crueler than the one I was given. Once again, crafty and greedy men conspired behind the cover of shadow, and it was this boy that paid the price. The boy's early life was something I would not even wish on Madara Uchiha, for children are the only humans that are innocent. They are only innocent for a brief time before the taint of this world corrupts them, but they are innocent and pure, nonetheless. The rest of this story is about my journey within the boy. Before you read this story, know that I came to regret my early actions. My hatred clouded my judgment and stopped me from seeing what should have been obvious from the start. The boy was brilliantly bright, and his soul was pure. My interaction with the boy set the wheels of fate spinning and turned the world completely onto its head. It was the beginning of my end and of my redemption. Singularity. Naruto's first day at the academy was not what he had hoped. The glares were ever present, his teachers were mean, and he got nothing out of the day. He stood in the hallway and held pails of water for most of the day and his young mind couldn't figure out why. He thought as he stood in the hallway and reflected on his life. He was 8 years old, abused, undereducated, malnourished and alone. His sharp mind was hampered by the nerfs as he struggled to make sense of what exactly he had done to deserve such treatment. He walked out of the academy and saw the stares of the parents, he heard the whispers of those around him and his head slumped further and further. His heart clamped in a mournful pain and tears threatened to escape his ducts. His feet took off underneath him and he ran. He ran to get away from the judgment. He ran to get away from the hate. He ran to any place that didn't have people around. People meant nothing but pain to the small child. Naruto crumpled into his bed while begging for the sweet release of sleep. His hunger gnawed at his stomach because his apartment had been ransacked once more. Evidently, the villagers took offense to him joining the academy and this was their way of showing it. Eventually, the boy was able to close his eyes and he fell into a restless sleep. Naruto awoke to the sound of his apartment door getting kicked open and the shouts of at least 10 villagers entered his apartment. He attempted to hide under the bed, but his fears came true when he was yanked by his ankle out from under the bed. The shouts, hatred and beating began. The last thing Naruto remembered was having a kunai slit his throat before his world went dark. Naruto abruptly awoke in a dark hallway that was filled with water. The only saving grace was that he could no longer feel the pain dampening his body. The illumination in the long hallway was flickering and it was mostly red. A warmth that felt like fire emanated from the red pipes that ran along one side of the hallway while the blue pipes were leaking blue water. The walls on the side of the hallway with the blue pipes was crumbling and Naruto knew that didn't mean anything good. Come. Naruto heard a deep voice say in a growl and, against his better instincts, his feet moved him down the hallway towards the voice. Naruto didn't know how long he was walking or how many turns he had to take. His feet moved him forward and as he got closer, the red pipes burned hotter. As he got closer, fire filled him, and he became wary which caused his footsteps to slow. By the time he entered a great room, he was barely moving forward, and he was feeling incredibly tired. He trudged forward as his consciousness was fading and his tired eyes locked on the darkness in front of her. He looked up to see a great golden gate with bars that reached up higher than he could see. Behind the gate, fire flared in the background of a massive 9-tailed fox that was ramming its body against the golden gates. The gates didn't budge, but each charge sent a wave of fiery hot chakra down the red pipes. He watched the spectacle with fascination as his mind weakened and the tiredness began to consume him. Kurama paused his charges when he saw the boy in his chamber. This filthy chamber that resembled a sewer filled with dank water that covered the floor. He had awoken from his slumber a couple years back and he was appalled to be contained in such a shoddy seal. At least in Mito's seal, he was immobilized in a respectable chamber. Kushina had him bound to a sun of sorts and there were chains holding him to it, but he at least had a galaxy-like setting to look off into. However, this filthy place was completely unbecoming and unworthy of his greatness. Kurama had been awoken suddenly from the panic of his vessel. He had grown accustomed to the beating because of their frequency, but each one only served to increase his hatred of this village called Konoha. He found it incredibly ironic that this vessel was a noble of 3 clans and they treated him like this. His dormant power was immense, but he would never be able to reach his potential in this environment. He glared down on the pathetic representation of the boy's consciousness. He could tell that he was fading, and he didn't want to know what would happen to himself if the boy died. He made a decision, and he calmed his movements. He focused and kept chakra flowing through the water on the floor to heal the boy's grievous injuries that were accumulating in the outside world. He lowered his head to the child and called to him. So, my container has finally made time to see me. Come, child, I wish to see you better. Kurama said while trying to suppress his hatred. Naruto looked up in a daze. Where am I? Kurama suppressed the snarl that was rumbling in his throat. We do not have times for such details. You are dying and I need you to open the cage if I am to save you. Naruto shrugged with a despondent look on his face. What if I don't want to be saved? What if I just want it to be over? Kurama could feel the boy's despair and weariness. He felt a slight pang of guilt because children should never feel this way. Children were innocent creatures, and this child was robbed of that innocence. When Kurama first awoke, the bright innocence and strong soul stilled his claws and anger towards the child. He was still recovering from being sealed and he was content to review the memories as they streamed in. However, that all changed as the memories became darker and his treatment became more violent. Kurama was no stranger to violence, but this treatment made him sick. Adults isolating and beating a defenseless child. Fully grown adults beating a defenseless and blameless child. Thousands of adults robbing the light from this child. It would be more merciful to send this child to Kami's realm and leave him in her tender mercies. Kurama softened his features and spoke softly. Then come to the cage, child. I will end the pain. His mind raced with worries of what death would feel like. He wondered if he would reform himself. His siblings had died and reformed in the past and they told him of the excruciating process. That wasn't what he wanted. He wanted to end the child's pain and take control. He would make sure to properly avenge his final vessel. Naruto's hazy mind craved the release from its suffering. He had been holding on to his wits' end for his whole life and it only got worse after getting thrown out of the orphanage at the tender age of 4. He couldn't bring himself to care what would happen, and he walked forward into the cage. He didn't feel anything ominous, and he only craved release from unending suffering. When he entered, he looked up into the intimidating eyes of the Kyuubi and before he knew what happened, his whole world went dark. Kurama steeled himself to do what needed to be done and he held back his hatred as the boy approached. This could be considered a mercy killing and he was putting himself at significant risk to do so. He didn't know what would happen to his consciousness, but he knew that he didn't want the boy's torment to continue. As Naruto willingly entered his domain, he lashed out quickly with a single claw. He didn't wish to prolong the boy's suffering, he wanted it to end quickly and peacefully. The claw pierced the boy's torso and Kurama's whole world went dark. He didn't even have time to panic or lament the end. Only blackness overtook his consciousness. From a third-person perspective, as soon as Kurama's nail penetrated the boy's torso, the paper on that covered the main seal on the gate shredded into millions of pieces. This exposed a representation of the metallic Shinigami that was glowing with a swirling dark red and light blue chakra. The chakra continued to swirl and gave off a brilliant light. The light grew in intensity and pulsated in increasing frequency before exploding outwards in a powerful display of chakra light. After the light explosion, the mindscape went dark. On the outside world, those that had broken into Naruto's apartment were temporarily aghast at the man that slit the demon's throat. They all knew the orders of the Hokage, and they feared the man's wrath. So far, he had let each person that attacked Naruto off with a slap on the wrist because the child had always recovered without so much as a scar. However, blood poured out of the wound in spurts, and they were sure that not even the Kyuubi could recover from such a ferocious attack. As red chakra started boiling out of the wound, they panicked and backed away from the child in shock. Their shock didn't last long before they stabbed, kicked and did what they could to stop the red chakra from spreading. Soon, Anbu entered the room, and the intruders were surrounded. They would be taken to the prisons again, and this would all be over since it was clear that the demon would survive. That was when an explosion of demonic chakra ripped through them, ripped through the walls of the room and ripped through the upper floors of the building. The Anbu watching outside would report an immense chakra explosion that was demonic in nature. The Anbu inside would report the same, and they would be able to survive thanks to quick reactions, but they would be sent to the hospital with severe chakra burns. They would remain cooped up in the hospital until their treatments for extreme chakra poisoning were complete, which took months. The civilians were disintegrated by the powerful demonic chakra, and only their clothes and belongings remained. This event, an explosion of demonic chakra, rocked the village and brought the Hokage and his guard to the site. Hiruzen was the Sandaime, third Hokage, and he was the only Hokage ever to resume his post after retiring. His successor had died during the Kyuubi attack and left him with a literal shitstorm. The village was in ruins and 40% of his forces were dead or grievously injured. He did everything he could to rebuild, but he was already old, weary and far past his prime. He missed far too many details during the rebuilding, and it cost him a great deal of power and influence. That power and influence caused him to lose grips on the reins of the civilian councils, and he found himself unable to regain control. They made demands that were attached to the funding that he desperately needed to rebuild. He gave in to those demands and commonly came to regret doing so. In the 8 years since then, they gained more power as Hiruzen lost the will to resist them. They took full advantage of that, and it led to his second greatest regret in life. Hiruzen's inability to protect his successor's child turned Jinchuriki was, perhaps, his second greatest regret. From the day he had announced the boy's Jinchuriki status, he had repeatedly failed the child, and he thought about it almost every day. Perhaps his greatest failure as a human being and Hokage was giving into apathy as the situation snowballed further and further out of control. There were many clans that wanted to adopt the child, but Hiruzen couldn't let that happen. They only wanted Naruto to gain the power of a Jinchuriki for their own families and clans. It would upset the delicate balance of power too greatly. If Naruto had to suffer to maintain the balance of power, then that was the burden he was destined to carry. He remembered the letters that were left for him by Mintao. Every Hokage left letters in case of an untimely death, and Minato had updated his just before Kushina was scheduled to give birth. He knew of Naruto's great lineage, but he justified his inaction by telling himself that he couldn't show favoritism to one child. He told himself that he was protecting Naruto from the would-be enemies that were outside the village in the boogeyman forms of Kumo and Iwa. He turned an apathetic eye towards the enemies of the child that he called his villagers because they were better than the boogeyman other villages represented. All of those apathetic thoughts disappeared when he felt a great surge of demonic power and he heard the explosion that echoed around Konoha. He was out of his bedroom and accompanied by his Anbu detail within seconds, and he was at the site of the explosion within minutes. However, he wasn't prepared for what he found when he arrived. The 3-story apartment building was no more. There were flames that illuminated wisps of red demonic chakra that hung in the air. The top 2 floors of the building were gone, and the lower floor was still aflame with shinobi attempting to subdue the flames. He saw Anbu pulling charred remains out of the house, and a gathering of 100 or so civilians were forming a perimeter. He jumped down to take command of the situation. Dog. The Sandaime shouted at the dog-masked Anbu before said Anbu was kneeling before him. Report. Dog knelt and bowed to his Hokage. The Anbu detail guarding him was pulled at the last minute. This allowed roughly 10 civilians and shinobi to break into his apartment. It is unknown what happened because they are all dead. Hiruzen growled, I don't care about that. What happened to Naruto? He needed to know what happened to his Jinchuriki. Dog shuffled nervously. He was in critical condition, and we took him to the hospital. According to surviving Anbu members that showed up after the initial chakra spike, Naruto caused this explosion with a release of pure demonic chakra. Nico. Hiruzen shouted and the cat-masked Anbu was in front of him within seconds. Go to the hospital and watch over Naruto. If they do not give him the proper treatment willingly, inform them that they will be spending some quality time with Ibiki. Enough is enough. Cat disappeared and Hiruzen remained on site to contain the blaze and do his part to lead the disaster recovery. It was a long night and thoughts of his failures would haunt him for quite some time to come. Peaceful sleep would prove elusive, and his weary heart desperately needed rest. Kurama awoke within the mindscape, but he immediately knew something was off. He was much too close to the floor and the ceiling looked so tall. Furthermore, the water was on his face and his face felt slick. That shouldn't be. The water always made his fur stick to him and felt clingy and damp. With a groan, Kurama attempted to lift his head out of the water. He was able to do so, but that action that normally caused him to rise a couple stories in the air only lifted his eyes a couple inches from the water. That startled him out of his weary shock and his eyes snapped open completely. He looked down into the clear water on the sewer floor and his eyes widened further as shock set in. Looking back at him was the face of his jailer, but Kurama saw it as if it were his own. A startled hand appeared in the reflection provided by the shallow water and touched his face. Kurama had sent that impulse to raise his arm and touch his face. Kurama felt fingertips, soft, fleshy, tiny human fingertips touching his face. As the fingertips idly brushed past the whisker marks, Kurama let out his instinctual purr of contentment, but it was wrong. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. Kurama attempted to jump to his feet, but he was not expecting to struggle so heavily with a bipedal form. He collapsed back into the water and growled at the reflection glaring back at him. The tiny human face, the tiny red eyes with normal irises, the pathetic human form and the damnable blonde hair. All of that looked back at him and Kurama swiped a hand into the water and scattered it. Kurama didn't panic. He was a Biju that was essentially immortal, and he had lived for over 1,000 years. He closed his eyes and tried to think about the situation. The last thing he remembered was pitying the poor boy and ending him with one of his claws. Then, he woke up with this form, so, what happened to his form? What happened to his chakra? Those questions spurred Kurama to once again attempt walking. Damn it, the hairless apes make this look so easy. Kurama growled as he leaned against the wall of the sewer and used it to stabilize his shaky legs. He walked towards where he could feel his potent chakra, but it felt off and peaceful, like it wasn't his anymore. Kurama struggled to walk and make his way toward his prison for 30 minutes. By the end of it, he was able to walk shakily on his feet and he entered into his auditorium to see something strange. As he entered his old chamber, he saw that it was fully illuminated, and he saw a small fox cub with 9 tails sleeping peacefully on a rock that was raised out of the murky water. Kurama could sense the powerful chakra, but he could no longer feel the overwhelming hatred that was linked to it. Oh, shit, Kurama muttered with his mind racing as it processed the possible implications of this. Oh, shit is right, Kurama. A ghastly voice answered his mutterings as it appeared in the chamber. Kurama turned in a wobbly and undignified manner towards the cold and powerful feeling that entered the chamber. His growl was caught in his throat as he took in the form of the Shinigami. It wasn't the visage of the god that mortals knew, but it was even more terrifying to the eldest of the Biju. The gray hair fell in long glistening locks and framed a divinely beautiful face. The glistening and porcelain skin of the Shinigami amplified the beauty of the goddess of death and entranced Kurama with its ethereal beauty. Her enchanting and dignified form made Kurama gulp as he processed the bust and beautiful body of the goddess that was in his, or his jailer's, mindscape. Kurama instinctively bowed to one of the few entities in this world that was able to overpower him and make him feel fear. He stumbled forward as the awkward center of gravity changed, and this ungraceful act made the Shinigami chuckle. He suppressed his growl and offered his greetings to the deity. "Forgive me, Shinigami-sama. I am very disoriented and unused to this human form," Kurama said while bowing. The Shinigami brought the sleeve of her yukata in front of her face to hide her chuckle. "That is quite alright, Kurama. It is expected in a case such as this." Kurama rose from his bow. "What case? What happened?" The Shinigami's chuckling halted abruptly. "What did you think would happen when you messed with a seal imbued with my divine essence? From the day I made that seal, I linked your soul to the boy's own." Kurama nodded hesitantly. "So, I am just in control of his body until he wakes." The pathetic human voice that escaped this form honestly infuriated Kurama. Shinigami looked at the kitsune cub sleeping within the cage with a faraway look in her eyes. "If that were the case, do you think that would look like that?" Kurama's head followed the Shinigami's gaze and looked at the fox kit. "I fear not." The hesitation in Kurama's tone was palpable now. Shinigami looked back at Kurama. "You attempted to kill the child. It would have been a mercy." Kurama protested, and the childish face fell into a look of agony. "For once in my life, I gave him an act of mercy." Shinigami frowned as she acknowledged the truth of his words. "I do not disagree with you. However, the seal ensured that if the child died, then you would die." Kurama nodded and tried to affix a look of understanding on his human face. "Okay, so why am I in a human form?" Shinigami's frown deepened. "I don't know. You were not supposed to be able to do any real damage to the boy's soul." Kurama sighed. "He was only hanging on by a thread, Shin. Even with all of the rage and hatred I harbor, I would not wish his life on Madara." This statement caused the Shinigami's eyebrows to raise. "That is a powerful statement coming from you, Kurama." Kurama shrugged his tiny human shoulders. He would lament later that it used to be a much more majestic gesture. "It is the truth. So, can you reverse this nonsense?" he asked hopefully. "No," was the Shinigami's reply. "What?" Kurama shouted in indignation and disbelief. "Why not?" The Shinigami sighed and looked sorrowfully at Kurama. "Because this was not my doing. I do not know how it happened, but it did." "No," Kurama said and clutched his pathetic human head with wide eyes. "No." Shinigami walked up to Kurama's form and gently lifted his small human face to look her in the eye. "You have a couple choices, Kurama. You can either live in denial or accept the reality of your situation." "How? How am I supposed to accept it?" he asked incredulously. "You just told me that I am human now. I am no longer the greatest of the Biju. I am the thing that I hate most in this world. And I am stuck in this pathetic body." Shinigami looked impassively at the temper tantrum. "That doesn't change the fact that you are human now. In fact, I find it rather fitting." Kurama glared with his powerful red eyes at the Shinigami. "How is it fitting?" Shinigami chuckled wryly. "You went from the prince of the Biju to the prince of Konoha. You are the rightful heir of Konoha." Kurama scoffed. "As if that means anything. This pathetic village was the one to destroy the boy's will." Shinigami nodded at that. "Did you notice anything in the boy before this event happened? Do you know the potential that body holds?" Kurama snorted. "It is a human." Shinigami cut him off. "It is a human vessel gifted by a miraculous combination of 3 of the strongest bloods since your father. This vessel represents the remerging of Indra and Ashura." Kurama looked horrified at the thought. "What? I am going to have those cursed eyes." Shinigami sighed and buried her head in her hands. "You short-sighted idiot. You may have the Sharingan, but what do those eyes lead to when Indra and Ashura are reunited?" Kurama tantrum halted and his jaw fell open. It took him a full minute to consider the ramifications of what was just said. "Father," was the one word that Kurama was able to get out. The Shinigami nodded and her silvery hair swayed with the motion. This child had the markings of fate and destiny all over him. And now, so do you. Kurama, his tiny, childish head to the side. What? How? The Shinigami chuckled. Can you not see it? The fates love their ironies so much. You hated humanity and now you are human. You hated being controlled and now you will have the power to control. You hated being caged and now you cage someone. You want to destroy Konoha, but only Konoha can give you what you truly want. Kurama was nodding along in a begrudging understanding until that last part. What do you mean Konoha can give me what I want? The Shinigami laughed. I have said too much. Think on it though, Kurama, and ask yourself what you truly want. Do not waste this opportunity, Kurama. I believe it is time for me to go, but I will be watching you. Should you attempt to undo this, she gestured in between Kurama and the nine-tailed fox kit, then I am sure you will not like the outcome. With that, the Shinigami disappeared, and Kurama was left standing within his mindscape with a lot to think about. He didn't know how long he stood there with him mind racing, but it was definitely a long time. Finally, he raised his eyes and looked at the peacefully sleeping Kit. From the time he matured, he had watched over humanity with disgust. They had very few redeeming qualities, but he had always appreciated the innocence of children. It was a fleeting innocence, but it was genuine and pure. It was a point that was further emphasized by seeing the contentedly sleeping fox Kit. Kurama had wished on many occasions and countless times that he would be able to have a kid of his own. He had attempted it with Matabi in the past, but it never produced results. The inability to reproduce had been one of the things he was mad at his father for. The thoughts of the centuries without someone to care for and the loneliness it brought on filled Kurama's heart, and his tiny hand clasped the aching left chest. This was too much. With that final thought, Kurama's world went dark. A second awakening. The Sandaime Hokage had ordered a full review of the attack on Naruto, and it had been a week already. He could only entrust such a thing to his most loyal Anbu, dog, and it was proving to be more trouble than he was willing to handle. The two Anbu assigned to guard Naruto were called away on official summons from the civilian council. The civilians couldn't give them orders, but they were allowed to summon them. How Hiruzen let that happen, he didn't know. However, he would use this incident to strip that power from them. The investigation showed that counselors Haruno and Otaru had called the Anbu for a report. The counselors claimed that they wanted a status update on the demon's first day in the academy. Hiruzen had also tasked Dog with discovering what happened on the first day, and he wasn't surprised. Of course, Naruto was bullied by students and teachers alike. Of course, they would refuse to train him. The many thoughts circled in his brain, and he found his head buried in his hands with his thumbs rubbing out his temples. As for the attack itself, he can assume by missing persons reports the identities of those responsible. He had already denied the civilians' attempts to have the boy executed for murder because it was so obviously a case of self-defense. Naruto's body was in terrible condition by the time he received treatment, and it was a miracle the child was alive. The red glow around the boy's body was ominous, despite the fact that it was the only thing keeping the boy alive. The healing power of the Kyuubi was truly magnificent. The boy had no scars remaining on his body and he was in a medically induced sleep. He had been for a week now, and Hiruzen had ordered the drugs be stopped 2 days ago. Despite that, the boy hadn't stirred. His successor's son was in a coma for all intents and purposes, and there was nothing that Hiruzen could do. Of course, he had tried the usual, but Inoichi told him that it didn't work. Each time Naruto was beaten this badly, he had ordered Inoichi to remove the memories. Inoichi had never failed to do so before, despite his protests in doing so, so this was concerning to Hiruzen. He had a feeling that he wouldn't like what he found when the boy awoke. After Inoichi failed, he tried his hand at sealing off the memories only for the seals to decompose almost immediately in fizzles of demonic chakra. Something had changed in the boy, and he knew that he needed to find out what it was. Hokage-sama. Cat appeared on a knee and awaited the order to report. At the nod from Hiruzen, she continued. Uzumaki Naruto has awoken. Kurama had recovered from his fainting spell in his own subconscious. It was an extremely odd occurrence, and he was embarrassed by the event. He had sat for the past 2 days. Once his mind felt clear and he reviewed the boy's memories. They were more unpleasant than the glimpses he had from within the cage. This damned village was inhumane to him, and they had the audacity to call him the demon. Once Kurama got past the memories, he began planning. He knew from the memories that he would likely wake up in a hospital, and his negative emotion sensing let him know that he was likely in such a place. He also knew that the Hokage would be notified when he awoke. That meant he had to plan out this conversation first. That was a monumental task for the former Biju. Normally, he would just threaten the old monkey, but this body didn't have access to his former power, and it had yet to awaken its, or his now, own power. It was an eye-opening experience for Kurama to reflect and meditate from a position of helplessness. It was a truly terrible and foreign feeling for the entity that used to be the strongest of Hagoromo's children. It was so overwhelming that the first couple hours were wasted by rapidly spinning thoughts and self-pity. After calming down using his father's own meditative exercises, Kurama was able to think clearly. Let's look at the facts. He was trapped in a human boy's body, and it was in extremely poor condition. The boy had minimal knowledge, no training, nobody willing to train him, and he could barely read. His consciousness solved the knowledge issue. He knew enough of chakra and the human body to start his training, and Kurama knew how to read many of the human dialects. The mental challenges of the boy wouldn't be the problem, however, justifying the change to the humans without arising suspicion would be. Kurama knew that he would be watched closely after an attack like this. Those humans referred to as Anbu would be monitoring him. They weren't a big problem, but they would be annoying. The villagers would be sure to hate him even more if they saw the changes, and he wasn't sure this tiny body would allow him to defend himself. For the great Kurama to worry about such a petty thing as human adults was truly a humbling thought. Despite that concern, he knew that the human leader of the village would be the biggest issue. The old monkey would undoubtedly be concerned about Naruto after this. Kurama knew that the attack was far worse than the others, and he knew that meant the Hokage would make an appearance. Kurama hated that man with the entirety of his being. He was apathetic towards Hiruzen when he was in his cage because it was the boy's life. However, now that it was him in this body and he was facing these fears, Kurama hated the old man. To Kurama, Hiruzen's indifference and apathy were as evil as any of the other deadly sins. Sloth and apathy let corruption grow, and corruption was rampant in this village. The blame for that were laid at the feet of the Hokage. All it takes for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing, and that is exactly what Hiruzen Sarutobi had done. Now that Kurama was on the receiving end of this apathy, he needed to figure a way around it. That brought Kurama to thoughts of knowledge that he could use to strengthen his position. Kurama knew at least part of the boy's lineage, and he could infer the rest with decent accuracy. He knew that Kushina Uzumaki was the boy's, or now his, mother. She was treated almost as poorly as her son had been for most of her time in Konoha. She had adamantine chakra chains, Uzumaki vitality and chakra, and she knew a fair bit about Fuinjutsu. These were genetic traits that he probably had access to. The boy's father was Minato Namikaze, the very mortal that sealed Kurama into the boy. He was an admittedly strong human, and he was the previous leader of the village. He knew that the mortal had developed several jutsus and seals. However, he wouldn't have access to those. He also knew that Minato was responsible for the Senju, or Ashura's, blood. Kurama could feel it in his body, and he knew it would be a powerful asset. This made Kurama think about where Indra's lineage came from. It was this fact that he didn't know, but he knew it was most likely not through the father. That left the mother's side of the genetic tree. That being said, it disgusted Kurama to no end. The thought of those eyes in his head made him extremely agitated. However, if he mastered their power and acquired his father's eyes, then he would become extremely powerful. Kurama could appreciate power and he could appreciate the potential retained in this body. He could even appreciate the essentially royal status that he inherited from the boy. The question became, how does he survive and thrive to attain that strength? Could he trust Hiruzen? No, Kurama didn't think so, and he justified that rationale by examining the boy's treatment thus far. Who could he go to? Who is this damnable village could he find as an ally? Finding an ally was a humbling thought for Kurama. It would be possible for him to do with his negative emotion sensing, but where to look? How to find them? How to hide it from the Hokage? Those were questions that started popping up when he thought about his planning. He pushed them aside for now and made it his primary goal to focus on surviving. Kurama felt his consciousness awaking and he was pulled out of the mindscape. He looked around at the room that was filled with blindingly white light, an antiseptic smell, and at least 2 of those Anbu. Kurama's face scrunched up as the antiseptic smell overpowered his keen sense of smell and he shook out his head. Kurama shifted in the bed and moved his tiny human form in the real world for the first time. It was one thing to do it while in the mindscape, but the vivid feelings of the boy's body were a trip for Kurama. He flexed his tiny little fingers and balled them into a fist. He pushed down on the bed and shifted his sore body up into a sitting position. The aching in his body was foreign to him and he really didn't like how puny it made him feel. He wiggled his little human toes and flexed his knees. The pain from tight muscles made him groan aloud. Moving hurt and every action felt so small, pathetic and human. Uzumaki-san, how are you feeling? Kat asked as she took a look at the boy. Kurama his head to the side and looked at the cat mask. I am waking up in a hospital after nearly dying. Again, how do you think I feel, Nico? Kat was startled by the hoarse voice and abrupt demeanor. She had watched over Naruto for quite a while, and she knew of his cheery mask that he wore in public. She was one of the rare few that ever got to see the sad and reflective eyes. She gasped aloud when she saw that the amazing azure blue eyes were replaced by a vibrant and blood-red color. She knew that this wasn't going to go over well with the civilian council. Kat cleared her throat, not knowing that Kurama could feel her fluctuating emotions. My apologies, Uzumaki-san. It was a stupid question. I will inform the Hokage that you have awoken. Kurama, in Naruto's body, reached out and grabbed her hand. My stomach hurts and I think it is because I am hungry. Could you get me some food, please? Kat nodded toward a corner where a bear-masked Anbu appeared. Bear, could you do that while I inform the Hokage? 10 minutes later, while Naruto was chowing down on some food, Hiruzen entered the room dressed in his Hokage garb. He placed his hat down on the bedside table and looked at the boy. The boy had stopped eating and was looking back at him, and it took every bit of training Hiruzen had not to wince. The red eyes terrified him to his core, and he was only grateful that there were no slits, otherwise they would be just like the Kyuubi's eyes. Hiruzen sat down in a chair at the side of the bed. Good afternoon, Naruto-kun, how are you feeling? Kurama suppressed the growl that instinctively wanted to escape his throat. What was it with humans and these petty, meaningless questions? He calmed his voice and tried to make it sound childish. Like I just woke up after getting beaten again. How long was I out for this time? Yes, he could feel the guilt and he could play off that. Hiruzen sighed and failed to suppress the frown on his face. 7 days. Naruto, do you remember anything from that night? Kurama rubbed at where he knew the kunai had slit his throat. Yes. He said defiantly before adding. And I don't appreciate you sending people to poke around in my mind. It never worked and it always feels weird. It was strange for Kurama to navigate this conversation from a child's position of fragility and weakness. Hiruzen was startled by this information. What do you mean it never worked? I will not deny that I attempted to remove your bad memories, but why did you never tell me this, Naruto-kun? Hiruzen couldn't hide the fear and anticipation that was making his chakra go wild, not to Kurama. Kurama glared at the Hokage and enjoyed the wince he detected. Why would I? You let people beat me and then try to cover it up. Hiruzen coughed into his hand to regain his footing in the conversation. Then why are you telling me now? He challenged. Because I am sick of it. Do you want somebody you don't know poking around at your head? Kurama answered defiantly. What happened while you were asleep, my boy? Hiruzen asked to change the topic. Kurama shrugged. Stuff. How am I supposed to know? I was asleep. He played the child card here because he could feel that the Hokage was going to get to the information he didn't want to share. Hiruzen sighed and looked back at Naruto with weary eyes. Naruto, you know your eyes are red now, right? Kurama didn't actually know that his eyes were red in the real world. That could complicate some things for him. He tried to act surprised, but he was still new to the facial expressions of humans, and it came out all wrong. No, I did not. Why are my eyes red? Hiruzen saw that something wasn't right, and he knew that he had to look into this. That being said, he didn't want the boy to know about the Kyuubi and he was dancing around a sensitive issue. He decided to play the old grandfather card. I don't know, my boy, I was hoping you could tell me. Kurama shrugged because could feel the game at play, and he didn't know what he should do about it. When in doubt, guilt trip it out. What aren't you telling me, old man? Why do all the villagers hate me? What did I ever do to them? Hiruzen sighed. They were just going around in circles here. He couldn't tell Naruto about the Kyuubi, and he didn't know what was going on that most definitely had to deal with the fox. I don't know, Naruto. You have done nothing to them, my boy. Kurama couldn't catch the flare of anger that expressed itself in his eyes nor the flare of Naruto's chakra that accompanied it. If you are going to lie to me, then you can leave, Hokage-sama. Kurama spat out in disgust. He added the Hokage bit to play on the old monkey's guilt. Hiruzen frowned at the abrupt, at least to him, change in behavior. That is not nice, Naruto-kun. You know that you can call me Gigi. I see you as my grandson, after all. Oh, hell no. Kurama's anger flared further, and he growled this time. If you let your grandchildren get beaten and treated worse than the stray dogs and cats in the village, then I don't want any part of that. You are and will be Hokage-sama so long as you continue lie to me. The Hokage was taken aback by the violent reaction, and he could feel killing intent. A child should never be able to express killing intent. He recomposed himself for a couple seconds before responding to that. That is not a nice thing to say, Naruto. You should apologize. Plus, I am not lying to you. Kurama barked out an ominous laugh. He was done playing around and his anger was getting the better of him. He wanted to destroy this pathetic human. Haha, save that load of garbage for someone who believes it. I will tell you what, if I can go a single month without getting beaten, then I will apologize. Other than that, if you are going to lie to me, then you may as well leave. Kurama crossed his childish arms in front of his chest and glared at the Hokage. Well, shit, there is my temper getting the best of me. Kurama thought as the awkward silence and stare down progressed. I am Kurama, eldest son of Hagoromo, and I will not tolerate this mortal treating me in such a manner. I refuse to act like a child to please him. Oh well, it is his move now. Hiruzen stared into the red eyes of the child. It looked like he was Kurana's son or something now. It was such a startling difference from the azure blue eyes that he didn't know how to handle it. It was likely that the boy didn't know anything, but could he risk that? The conversation today was completely blown, and he wasn't likely to get anything else out of pushing the boy today. He resignedly sighed and picked his hat off the bedside table. Very well, Naruto-kun. Just know that you can always talk to me. Kurama held his tongue and kept staring icily at the Hokage. This man was truly a pitiful specimen. Kurama could feel the apathy, self-loathing, doubt, remorse, weariness and anger that resided in his soul. He could feel everything that made Hiruzen Sarutobi so ineffective at completing his job. Quite frankly, it disgusted Kurama and he wanted no part in it. Hiruzen sighed wearily and left the room. He made a hand sign to cat and dog and the two of them joined the Hokage in the hallway. Once again, Hiruzen underestimated Kurama, whose hearing was extremely sensitive. Seems like the flooding of Biju chakra into the young body had some beneficial side effects. What have you two seen? Hiruzen asked cautiously. Dog answered first, nothing special. He just woke up, but that is the first time I saw him like that. Kurama could tell Kat was not happy with the two by her answer. I prefer that defiance to the dead look in his eye I saw on the first day of the academy. What he has gone through in his short life is pure evil. Jin, fine. Kat paused in a huff before continuing. No matter what he contains, he doesn't deserve this treatment. Hiruzen's sigh was pronounced. There is nothing we can do about the past. That's bullshit and you know it, Hokage-sama. Kat interrupted her leader for possibly the first time in her career. Kurama made a note to remove her from the kill and devour list. He may even put her on the keep alive list. Hiruzen's tone hardened, and he spoke harshly. That is enough, Kat. You don't know the whole story. Dog backed Kat up. Hokage-sama, there is no story where it is okay to do this to a child. The fact that the Kyuubi's chakra leaked out in such quantities makes this extremely dangerous. If the civilians and other shinobi persist, then the Kyuubi may actually break free. Kurama chuckled at that. If you only knew, doggy. He whispered in his childish voice while looking at his tiny and fragile human hands. Hiruzen sighed. It is clear that the amount of the Kyuubi's chakra he used had unforeseen effects. Just keep a closer eye on him. Those eyes will likely draw more negative attention from the civilians. Fear. Kurama hated every aspect of being a human so far. They grew tired so quickly and needed to sleep every day. He enjoyed naps, especially when he was in captivity, but the decreased efficiency of the human body when low on sleep was frustrating for the once majestic Biju. Then there was the hunger, and this was something that Kurama really despised. Especially because it was so hard for him to acquire any decent food. The damn shopkeepers treated him like well, they treated Naruto as if they thought he were him. The need to urinate and poop was by far the worst for Kurama. The chakra entity had never needed to perform such debasing acts before, and it was extremely awkward for him. The act of peeing wasn't so bad, but he hated that humans expected him to urinate in some pot when there were perfectly good trees all around. While he rapidly grew accustomed to urinating, the feeling of pooping for the first time was terrifying. It was disgusting, smelly, and he even had to wipe himself. Fate was cruel to put him into such a primitive life form. He was released from the hospital a day after he woke up, and it was then that he realized how terrible Naruto's life truly was. The Hokage prepared another apartment for him, and it was somehow already vandalized. In addition, Kurama had no clothes, no food, and no money. The stupid old monkey didn't realize this until Kurama called down Kat and informed her. Kurama appreciated how the woman took that personally, and she took him shopping when she returned from the Hokage office. For an entity that can sense negative emotions, Konoha was a true nightmare to live in. Kurama's ancient hatred for humanity burned in his chakra, and his red eyes flashed brighter as he glared down the foolish mortals that dared to glare at him. This wasn't missed by Kat, who had been taking notes on all the changes in her charge. This inspired her to strike up a conversation. Naruto, I noticed that you are different. You want to talk about it? She asked tentatively. Kurama looked up at the cat-masked Anbu and noticed that she was genuinely concerned, so he softened his tone. No, I am just done taking their hate, like it is my duty to do so. Kat was taken aback by the straightforward reply, so she responded to it. Naruto, you need to be careful. Doing that will only make them. Kurama scoffed. I know. Ever since I woke up, I just know what they feel. I know what the Hokage felt. I know he lied to me, and the feeling his chakra gave off made me sick. Tell me, Kat-san, if you lived in a village that hated you for an unknown reason and you had people treat you like this, how would you react? Kat remained quiet for a minute and continued walking to the next store. Kurama could feel her chakra was in flux as she kept coming to answers that she either didn't like or couldn't say out loud. I don't know. Kurama nodded. Exactly. Right now, All I want to do is get strong enough to protect myself from their whims. I will no longer tolerate their treatment. Kat looked down cautiously at Naruto. This wasn't the same child as a week ago. Kat didn't exactly like the changes, but she definitely couldn't blame him. So, you are going to go back to the academy? Kurama scoffed. Go back to a place where they actively teach me incorrect techniques or have me stand out in the hallway? No, I think not. Then what will you do, Naruto? Kat asked. Kurama shrugged. Maybe I will just go live in the forest. The animals couldn't be any worse than the villagers. As Kurama thought about that option, it actually seemed appealing to him. Kat frowned behind her mask. It is clear to her that the kid had been pushed too far. She knew that she would have to report this to the Hokage. For now, she just wanted to get him set up in his new house. She took him into a clothing store and got him 3 pairs of clothing and stared down the cashier until the man threw the pile of clothes at Naruto. As they were walking out of the store, Bear appeared in front of Kat. Kat, we need to report to the Hokage for a mission. Bear said. Kat looked down to Naruto and then up into the sky. It was getting dark, and she didn't want to leave Naruto alone. Let me get him home, then I will come. Bear moved in front of her. Kat, it is urgent, and you have been pulled from this detail. Kurama could feel negative emotions pouring off Bear and he instinctively shifted into a more defensive stance. Kat put her hand on Naruto's shoulder. Fine, I will report to the tower with him. We can find someone to walk him home from there. Kat disappeared in a shunshin to report into the Hokage's office. Hiruzen saw Kat appear in her office with a couple grocery bags and he saw Naruto carrying a couple bags of clothes. What are you doing here, Kat? Kat knelt. Bear said that you had an urgent mission. I wanted to report in with Naruto rather than leave him alone without a protective detail. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed. You are not being pulled for a mission. Return to your detail and I will deal with Bear. Kurama didn't like the feeling he was getting from this scenario. He also didn't like knowing that the Hokage probably wouldn't do anything to his own Anbu. Kat nodded and apologized to the Hokage for disturbing him. She walked Naruto home and helped him put his groceries into his new and shitty apartment. She took up her position and looked over Naruto's apartment. Everything was quiet at first, but that was about to change. Around 1 a.m., Kat was put under a pretty strong genjutsu and the only things she recognized before she was incapacitated were the red eyes of the Sharingan. She wouldn't wake up until much later and it would be much too late for her to do anything. Kurama awoke in the middle of the night and instantly felt the gathering of negative emotions. He extended his senses and felt that Kat was already incapacitated, and Kurama felt something he had never felt before. His heartbeat quickened, his mind raced in a disorganized fashion and his ears twitched as new sounds greeted his ears. He threw the covers off and went into full instinctual mode. He immediately looked to the window with widened and darted towards it to unlatch the window. Fear, all-encompassing fear gripped the Biju in human form. By the time the door was kicked open, Kurama was already out the window. Kurama used his tiny little human legs to run as his lungs began to burn. This feeling, this foreign and unwelcome fear, made him want to turn and fight. His pride fought against his instincts, but he knew that he was no match for the shinobi targeting him. He knew by the feeling of their chakra signatures that there were at least 2 shinobi in the group, and he knew that this tiny body could do nothing against them. As the burning in his lungs and legs grew, he still felt the shinobi tracking him. He couldn't lose them, and his flight instincts were pinging alarm bells at him. That was when things went from bad to worse as he was tackled to the ground by one of the ninjas. Kurama spun on the ground, wriggled out of his grip and kicked him on the chin. Before he could fully escape, he was grabbed by the leg and kicked in the side by a second shinobi. Then the rest of the mob caught up while guided by a third shinobi. Kurama's heart pounded out of his chest as fear filled the entirety to his being. Despite his pride, this tiny human form could do nothing. He had been attempting to pull on his chakra, but the fox kid was still asleep. He took the first punch to the face and tasted the iron in his mouth as the blow busted his lip. The next kick in the abdomen made him cough out a mixture spittle and blood. The next punch caused something to happen, and it truly enraged the former kitsune. As the punch approached his right cheek, the blow slowed down and the nighttime lost most of its color as black, red and gray became the most prominent colors in his vision. Kurama was able to raise a tiny hand and block the blow, at least partially. When the punch cleared and he glared back up at the 3 shinobi and 10 civilians, he heard the audible gasp. He saw the 3 Sharingan wielders back up a bit before their confusion turned to rage. "How do you have the Sharingan, demon?" the lead shinobi shouted as he reached for a kunai in his pouch. Kurama didn't answer. He was busy listening to stirring inside the seal and he sent a plea internally, "Naruto. I know you don't know what is going on, but I need you to try to push chakra through the cage." "Wah, what's going on? Where am I?" Naruto's confused thoughts came through the mental link. "Kit. Not now. I will explain later. I need you to push." Kurama's internal plea was disrupted by a kunai to the right shoulder from the enraged Uchiha. Naruto's eyes widened as images of the beating filtered into his mind. He huddled in fear, but he realized that he wasn't the one feeling the pain. He realized that it was the fox's voice, and he was the one taking the beating. For all of his apathy, depression and lack of caring, Naruto still hated to see other people suffering. He felt overwhelmingly powerful, but he didn't know what to do with this power. He started flaring his chakra and screaming while pushing against the bars of a cage he barely recognized. "Kit." Kurama pleaded as he felt pain rack through his body and he said a word he hadn't used in centuries, "Please." Naruto started freaking out and flailing against the cage. He saw the water turn red outside the cage and he saw the water turn into a bubbling orangish red chakra. He kept doing it in an attempt to provide assistance to himself. He shook off the confusion because fear was saturating the mental link and it resonated with his own fear. Kurama felt the familiar feeling of his own chakra and he tried to use it in any way that he could. While his attributes turned more feral, he glared back up at the Uchiha and civilians attacking him. He lashed out with his claws and tore into a leg from one of the Uchiha that was about to kick him. His chakra-enhanced nails ripped through the shinobi's pant and blood sprayed onto his face. He was kicked in the back of the head by another shouting Uchiha and Kurama did what he could to survive. He channeled as much chakra as he could, and his body reacted to it as 20 blood-red chains sprouted out of his back with arrowheads on the tips. The chains rattled briefly before they started tearing into those attacking him. Every one of the civilians was too slow to react and chains skewered them on various parts of their torso. 2 of the Uchiha were caught off guard and one of the younger ones had a chain piercing his eye socket and poking out the back of his skull. The other Uchiha had a chain penetrating straight through his chest and out the center of his spinal cord. That particular Uchiha was choking on his own blood. The final Uchiha looked on in horror as 2 of his clansmen and the mob he gathered was skewered. It was a bloody and grotesque sight, and he wasn't ready for it. He had only gathered the mob to curry favor with the villagers. The Uchiha clan had lost a lot of favor with the village, and everyone enjoyed a good fox hunt. Thus, to find that a young boy killed so many really rattled the experienced Chunin Uchiha. His confusion and horror turned to rage, and he weaved through hand signs for his clan's signature jutsu. As he blew out the great fireball, he was surprised when Anbu appeared in front of him and countered the jutsu with a water wall. He was then surprised as he was hit from behind and his world went dark. This night did not go as he had planned. Dog had gone to swap guard duty with Cat, and he was alerted when he found her sleeping. He broke her out of the genjutsu, and she immediately reacted by darting into Naruto's apartment. Dog knew that something was terribly wrong, and he summoned his canine companions to track Naruto down. The apartment showed obvious signs of intruders and Dog's heart clamped in fear as he followed Pakun, the leader of the pack, toward Naruto. When Dog arrived on scene, he was horrified to see that Naruto had chakra chains coming out of his back and he was aghast when he saw that multiple civilians and shinobi were dead. He was only brought out of his horror when he saw the single remaining shinobi beginning hand signs and gathering chakra. He disappeared in a shunshin and appeared in front of the boy already going through the hand signs and gathering chakra for a water wall. Dog countered the incoming fireball, and he heard the blunt impact of a hilt on the attacker's skull. When he turned around, he was more than a little surprised to look into Naruto's eyes and see the Sharingan with one Tomo in each eye looking back at him. How was this possible? Neither of Naruto's parents bore the Sharingan. Kakashi's thoughts were whirring so fast and colliding into one another that he couldn't break himself free until multiple Anbu squads were on site. Kakashi caught the unconscious body of the young boy that had been through too much and he took it once more to the hospital. This was no way for a boy to live. Fatherhood and companionship. Kurama faded from the real world and appeared in the mindscape to see Naruto in his fox kit form still smashing chakra into the cage. A small smile of appreciation graced his face as he looked at the young kit. Without that chakra, he probably would have died. He walked slowly towards the kid and spoke as calmly as he could. Hopefully his body would be okay in the custody of the dog Anbu. Kit, relax. You can relax now, Kurama called out in his own voice, and he was glad that at least that was the same within the mindscape. Naruto stopped mid-charge and he was panting as he sat on his haunches and looked at Kurama. He began looking at himself through the bars of the cage. It was super strange to him, and he needed to know what the hell was going on. It was all too much for a child to process. Why do you look like me? Naruto asked as he looked right into the eyes of his old form. Kurama sighed. Kit, this is going to sound insane, and I need you to not freak out. Naruto's fox head nodded slowly as the azure blue eyes with black slits looked back at Kurama. When you asked me to end your suffering, I tried. When I killed you, well, things happened. Naruto nodded slowly once more and replied wearily, I remember that but nothing else. Kurama tried to crack an understanding smile. Yeah, well, you and I got caught up in something crazy. Crazy how? Like, Shinigami showed up and swapped our bodies and souls kind of crazy. Kurama said in deadpan. Naruto's fox head to the side, are you joking? Kurama walked forward and tried to focus on the memories. He spoke calmly to Naruto, do not freak out and do not try to kill me. I am going to share the memories with you and then we can talk. Naruto nodded cautiously. Okay. After sharing the brief day's worth of memories, Naruto's fox form curled into a ball, and he hid his head under his tails. Things just went from bad to worse and his life really sucked. He didn't know which deity he pissed off, but he was really starting to get sick of it. He started whimpering and he was surprised when he felt a small body leaning into him. Kurama leaned his head back on the soft torso of the fox kit. You know, Naruto, I experienced something today that I had never felt in my life before. Naruto lifted one fox tail off of his head and looked with one blue eye at Kurama. What was that? Fear. Kurama said simply. Oh, Naruto replied, I know that one well. Kurama sighed, I know. Kurama paused and began petting Naruto's tails. I was able to review your memories when the swap happened. Look, kid, things suck, and they are only going to get harder. I mean, I still can't believe this is real. Naruto wrapped one of his fox tails around Kurama. Yeah, well, I am only an 8-year-old. I don't know what to think. Kurama chuckled at that. You are an 8-year-old, and you are now one of the most powerful beings in existence. Even in that tiny form, you hold all of my old chakra. Except, it isn't filled with all of the hate that I built up over the years. Really? Naruto asked and Kurama nodded. Well, that's cool. How do I use it? Kurama shrugged. I never really had to think about it. My power responded to my will and saturated my form. What I can tell you is that you are my successor. I will teach you what I know and find a way to ensure you are ready for the world. When I die, and this form returns to the cycle, you will live on. Sorry. Naruto said sheepishly. Kurama laughed at that. It's not your fault, Kit. This actually might be a blessing in disguise. Naruto his head to the side and his fox ears perked up while his tails uncovered his head. Blessing. How? Kurama shrugged once more. My existence wasn't exactly fun, and it wasn't very nice. Then, I had been locked up for the last 80 years or so. We will have plenty of times to review those shitty memories later in life. Oh, okay. So, what's your name? And am I the Kyuubi now? Naruto asked. Name's Kurama, Kit. And yes, those 9 tails make you the new Kyuubi. Naruto yipped wryly in distress. He, I guess the villagers are right now. He, I am the demon now. Kurama slapped one of Naruto's soft and tender ears. That is enough of that. Those villagers are ignorant monkeys driven by fear and baser instincts. Naruto was overwhelmed and didn't know how to feel. Oh, okay. He started weakly and a small smile worked its way onto his foxy snout. Well, I guess it is nice to meet you, Kurama. So, you know who my parents were, right? Kurama nodded with a sad smile on his face. Do you want to see them? Naruto yipped in sadness and tears started soaking the fur under his eyes. Please. Kurama turned around and gave Naruto an understanding smile. He amazed even himself with this interaction. It was like he knew on an instinctive level that this truly was his own kid now. He felt a paternal instinct stronger than anything he had ever felt in his life as he looked down at the fox kid, and it hurt him deeply to see the kid so sad. Kurama once again focused on the desired memories, and he placed his forehead onto Naruto's. Naruto saw images and spats of memories from his mother's perspective. Naruto saw how excited she was to be pregnant, and he saw all the preparations the blonde man made. He saw his mother rubbing her belly in the mirror and he couldn't help the thought that she was absolutely beautiful. He saw the night he was born, and he saw the Uchiha that interrupted the beautiful event. It enraged him and saddened him to the point where powerful red chakra was flaring wildly out of his form. Kurama felt the chakra spike and started petting the kid behind the ears to calm him down. Calm down, Kit. When you put off chakra like that, it pushes it out into our body, and it allows others to feel it. Shish, calm down. It will be alright. Naruto's ears folded back onto his head and tears fell freely from his fox eyes. So, it was all that man's fault. It was all the Sharingan. Kurama sighed. Yeah, and now I have the damned Sharingan, and chakra chains to boot. Naruto cringed in instinctive fear. Are you going to control me like that? Kurama scoffed and swatted him on the ear. No. Never. He started strongly before his tone softened. I am many things, but I am not a hypocrite. I know what it felt like to be enslaved to those eyes, and I promise not to do that to you. Why? Naruto asked shyly. It is your power to begin with. Kurama looked firmly at Naruto, and he turned the fox head to make Naruto look him directly in the eye. Look, Kit, when you have lived as long as I have, you learn to adapt quickly. I know this a lot for you to handle, but I need you to understand something. Naruto nodded cautiously while maintaining eye contact. That power is yours now. I may call on you for help, but I will train you to make it yours. You are my successor to the Kyuubi title, and for all intents and purposes, you are my son. Naruto shed tears at that. Thanks, Kurama. He then started yipping in laughter, and it was Kurama's turn to his head to the side. Ha, it is just funny, ha, to hear you say that when you look like a kid. I mean, you are 8 now. Ha. Kurama couldn't help himself. He started laughing too, and it seemed to alleviate the tension and fear in the air. Look, Kit, let's make a deal. Naruto stopped laughing and looked at Kurama as seriously as a fox kid could. You and I are going to help each other. I will tell you how to use my chakra. I will raise you, and in return you can give me a chakra bump when I need it. Sounds good. Naruto replied almost immediately. And this is my promise to you. I will either find a way to free you, or I will make sure that I free you before I die. Man, that is weird to think. I am immortal now. Kurama said while shaking his head in an attempt to accept his new reality. Naruto rubbed his head into Kurama's. Thank you, Kurama. Sure thing, Kit. Naruto. Kurama Hiruzen glared the council down and his eyes rested for an extra long period of time on Fugaku Uchiha, the head of the Uchiha clan. He had called this meeting because there was already substantial outrage over the deaths of yet more civilians and now shinobi were involved. His eyes moved from Fugaku to the other clan heads who were now upset for a completely different reason. The emergence of chakra chains let them in on something that Hiruzen didn't want them to know. With a sigh, Hiruzen began the meeting. Last night, around 1 a.m., 3 Uchiha and 10 civilians broke into the new residence of Uzumaki Naruto. They chased the boy out into a park, and they began beating him. During that beating, reports claim that the boy awakened the Sharingan, and he activated his chakra chains. This resulted in 2 dead shinobi, 4 wounded civilians and 6 dead civilians. There was 1 more shinobi from the Uchiha clan that is in custody and undergoing questioning. Hiruzen said blandly before the volume in the room escalated to a dim roar. After 10 minutes of shouting, a cane clicked on the floor and the room silenced. Danzo stepped forward. The emergence of the Sharingan and chakra chains in the Jinchuriki points to bloodline traits. You have denied knowing the boy's parents and I wish to know the boy's lineage. No. Hiruzen replied forcefully. Why not, Hokage-sama? If he has chakra chains, then, Sume protested before she was cut off. Hiruzen stood to his feet, flared his ki and raised his voice. Do not say what you are thinking out loud, Sume. The boy's parentage is an S-rank secret. I do not wish for it to get out and endanger him further. Shikaku scoffed, a supremely un-Nara-like behavior. Oh, please, how many attacks had the boy suffered within the village? The boy cannot possibly be in more danger than he is already in. Fugaku slammed his hand on the desk. I am more concerned with the fact that the boy has a Sharingan. That makes him an Uchiha, and he should be a member of the Uchiha clan. How does he have the Sharingan? A civilian asked. Is it the demon's doing? Hiruzen slammed his hand on the desk. Enough. The lineage is not to be discussed. The Sharingan comes from his mother's side and that is all I will say. Given the fact that it was 3 Uchiha policemen that attacked the boy, I deny the Uchiha's right to custody. Fugaku growled. That boy is the son of. Hiruzen flared his ki and cut Fugaku off. As I said to Sume, do not finish that sentence, Fugaku. Shuza Akamichi, clan head of the Akamichi clan, frowned, which was extremely odd for an Akamichi. Hokage-sama, if we all know it, then it is not a secret. It is proof that you lied to us. Hiruzen slammed his hand on the desk. I said enough. Hiashi cleared his throat, and we are saying that it is not enough. Explanations are owed, Hokage-sama. Kaharu shuffled forward. We would like to know as well, Hiruzen. Hiruzen flared up at that. That is Hokage-sama to you. I have every right to keep this secret. I have no reason to trust this council with such information. The boy has been repeatedly hospitalized for most of his life and each of you have clan members that have participated. The boy is not to be touched and you are not to interact with him. Sume growled. For what reason? If multiple clans start interacting with him, then it will draw attention to him from foreign spies. Hiruzen answered and this was less than satisfactory for most of the council. Danzo watched this council meeting, and he couldn't help the small frown that fixed itself on his face. His old rival had lost his touch and the way he was handling this whole issue only served to prove that fact. The boy is an invaluable and should damn well receive preferential treatment. The boy should receive training and he definitely shouldn't be left to rot in some hole while he is repeatedly beaten. The fact that the Kyuubi is already leaking so much chakra into the boy's system is proof of this. Danzo had always been a hardliner and he was a war hawk. He was proud of that fact, and he was proud that he had protected his village from the shadows for the last 50 years. While Hiruzen was Hokage, he was protecting Konoha and her interests abroad. While Hiruzen was shuffling paperwork, he was training a disciplined and elite shinobi force. While Hiruzen was the leaf that bathed in the sunlight, Danzo was the root that kept the great tree standing. Did he issue morally questionable missions? Absolutely. This world was a dark place. Did he push his subordinates' training a little too far? Probably. He had enough humanity left to admit that. Would he treat the true heir of Konoha in such a fashion? Absolutely not. Danzo knew on an instinctive level what this child meant to Konoha's future, and the early emergence of two bloodlines only served to prove that. The petty hatred of the villagers should have been snuffed out early on. Danzo had said as much to Hiruzen years ago. Danzo was a devout follower of Lord Sekon, and he had interacted many times with Mito Uzumaki. He wasn't her favorite person, but he paid attention to the lessons she provided. She taught that positive emotions, like love, were necessary to balance out the hatred that resided in the Kyuubi's chakra. He knew that Konoha was failing terribly on this front for the boy. As the petty council meeting dragged on, Danzo once again clicked his cane into the floor of the council chambers. They had been stuck on the boy's bloodlines and how he possessed them. It was obvious to Danzo. Danzo had stolen and copied the same note that Minato had left. He knew the boy's true lineage, and he knew the implications it had. What he didn't know was why Hiruzen was hiding it so obstinately. Hokage-sama, Danzo began slowly and deliberately. I am willing to move past the boy's lineage, but the reports from Kat that the boy would rather live in the woods than go to the academy are untenable. This statement earned interest from the council and quieted the hushed conversations. Hiruzen coughed into his hand. Yes, that is not a positive. Why doesn't the boy want to go back to the academy? Sum asked protectively. Now that she knew he was her best friend's son, she was going to get actively involved. Rather than let Hiruzen obfuscate, Danzo answered, on his first day, Uzumaki Naruto was kicked out of each class immediately after it began. He stood in the hallway for the whole day while holding water buckets. Because he was acting unruly. Mibuki Haruno answered with a huff. If you believe that, then I have a bridge in Kumo to sell you. Inoichi Yamanaka countered, and he continued, look, the boy's mind is fragile, and I can't blame him. I have attempted to suppress the memories of the mistreatment in the past. Hokage-sama informed me that the memory suppression that we have been doing has not worked. That means that he remembers every beating he has ever received, and if his medical records are to be believed, that is a lot of beatings. The child's mind had remained strong, but it was getting weaker and weaker with each new incident. Just give the child a break. That thing is not a child. It is a demon. Its eyes are red now, and that proves it. Mibuki shouted. Shut the hell up, you ignorant bitch. Sum growled, and his canine partner Kuromaru was on all fours at her side snarling. The last two beatings caused him to release enough of the Kyuubi's chakra that it affected his body. That is not the pup's fault. That is what happens when you repeatedly attack a child. A child that holds the demon at bay. Hiruzen pounded his hand on the table to regain control of this shitty situation. Enough. Counselor Haruno, please do not speak again for the remainder of this meeting. I have repeatedly explained that Naruto is not the Kyuubi. He is the jailer of the beast. That being said, assume it right. The boy has used the beast's chakra to protect himself. In the last 2 weeks, it has become more prominent, and the beatings are only accelerating it. Fugaku scowled. He should be locked away. If he cannot control himself, then we should lock him up until we have a way to control him. No, Hiruzen said harshly. Absolutely not, said Kaharu in disgust. I will rip your throat out if you suggest that again, snarled Sum. Here's a revolutionary idea. How about we don't permit the boy's continued assaults? If he wasn't attacked, he has never lashed out before. Is it too much just to leave the poor boy alone? Inoichi cut in. Shikaku was frowning, which was frankly too much work in and of itself. If everyone stopped being troublesome, then the situation wouldn't be so damn troublesome. Hiruzen pounded the desk to issue his orders. Enough. The boy will be watched by my Anbu, and the next civilians or shinobi that attack will be executed. The continued attacks put the village at risk now that the Kyuubi's chakra is lashing out. That is my command. The council meeting ended with very discontented clan heads and contemplative elders. The elders had lost faith in Hiruzen's leadership, and it was only getting worse as the years dragged on. They would come up with a plan to move behind the scenes, would no longer leave Suchin to the village to rot. Learning a human body was a completely new experience for Kurama, and he had used the last month to get used to it. He didn't go to the academy on most days. In fact, the only days he actually went and tolerated the abuse were the days that the Anbu forced him to. During that time, Kurama focused on mastering the basic of a human body. Balance, endurance, speed, limited senses, no tails and many other factors impeded Kurama's natural transition into the body. For balance, Kurama's trips to the woods helped. He had given up on attempting to get food from the shops in the village and he spent most of his time hunting or fishing in the woods. He acquired a couple kunai and some basic survival gear from the dog and cat Anbu that often followed him. He would prefer to stay out in the forest, but each night the Anbu guarding him would appear and take him back to the house despite his protest. He knew they were always watching him, and it was more than a little annoying for the kitsune turned human. Kurama truly despised his own weakness more than anything. The fact that he was at the whims and mercy of these masked humans made him resent his own weakness. To be weak and sentient was to be human. The human condition that Kurama was now stuck with, the very same one he had despised for centuries. The need to eat, the need to sleep, the need to urinate and defecate, the need for shelter and the fear that laid poorly hidden behind all of these needs. Kurama despised his own humanity. All that said, Kurama was happier the longer he was out of the village and away from the hate. His instincts felt at home in the forest, and he felt an unnaturally strong connection to nature. Not himself exactly, but it was as if his body resonated with nature, and he had already figured that it was the blood of Ashura that resided in the body that made him feel that way. That being said, he didn't have the first clue how to use that connection. It is not like he could just go ask the Hokage for instructions on how to use Mokuten or Senjutsu chakra. Yes, Kurama knew what those two things were. Kurama's natural instincts kicked in as he darted through the forest in pursuit of a deer that was in the area. Kurama's sense of smell and keen eyesight made him an efficient tracker. He hid behind a tree trunk and saw his quarry eating grass in a clearing. The problem was that his frail form made it challenging to secure the kill. His legs weren't strong nor fast enough, his frame wasn't big enough and Kurama was untrained in the ways of human combat. Within the seal, Naruto was beginning to stir in his fox form. The apathetic 8-year-old didn't know what to do with his time in the cage. Thus, he began doing what all children do. He explored the cage and tested the limits of his freedom. He moved back away from the bars into the darkness. He moved through the darkness as if guided by instinct to the back of a great cave. The light from the auditorium faded and Naruto found himself cloaked in the darkness of a cave. Kurama fidgeted with the kunai in his hands as the 6-point male deer continued grazing in the field. He suppressed his aura. He could at least do that much from all of the experience suppressing the strongest chakra in existence. He crouched low and stepped around the tree trunk as he hid his frame below the top of the grass. He moved silently and tucked the kunai into his teeth as he instinctively transitioned into an all-fours position. He moved silently and efficiently towards his unaware target. He could feel the chakra signature, he could feel its calm state and he knew that he only needed to move 50 feet until he was in position for an attack. Kurama's troublesome human heart started beating quickly as the anticipation of the kill overwhelmed him. With the increased anxiety, Kurama found it harder to suppress his aura and he was wary of giving his position away to his target. Despite his racing heart, each placement of the hand, each deliberate step of the feet made Kurama move silently towards his prey. Naruto stirred within the darkness as a sense of excitement and anticipation welled up and surrounded him. He could sense it so entirely that it was almost as if he was the one feeling the emotions. He closed his eyes and flickers of images from the outside world entered his mind. He felt Kurama's tension and purpose as he watched him move through the tall grass. His breath hitched in his fox form as he felt the hunter's instinct fall over him. Kurama was 10 feet away and it was time to move. To his immense frustration, the Sharingan activated on its own as his anticipation excited his chakra flow and the tiny human form made instinctively guided it to his eyes. Kurama took the kunai out of his mouth with his right hand and darted forward. The tiny body wasn't even half the size of his target, and the first strike missed its mark. The kunai dug into the deer's shoulder and the powerful beast rose up onto its hind legs and neighed in terror as it took off into the forest. Kurama held onto the kunai as his frail body was being pulled along by his prey. He felt the trees, shrubs and thorns of the forest ripping into him as he held onto the kunai with his right hand. Kurama's left hand latched onto the deer's hide and he pulled himself onto the deer's back. Once he was in a more stable position, Kurama was forced to duck a branch that nearly took his head off. This caused Kurama to lose balance once more and the deer continued its terrified plunge into the dense forest. Kurama was not going to tolerate being defeated by something that belonged on the bottom of the food chain. His stubbornness prevailed as he pulled himself flat onto the deer's back and his left hand repositioned itself on the deer's neck. With a more stable position, Kurama yanked the kunai out of the shoulder and began stabbing violently at the deer's neck. The deer's blood spurted, and it bucked wildly as the small weapon repeatedly tore into its neck. The deer threw its head back and its rack found purchase in the small boy's shoulder. Thus, the two began a violent struggle for survival and both of them paid the price in blood. Before long, the deer could no longer keep itself standing and it crashed unceremoniously into the ground, which caused the small boy to topple forward off its lifeless form. Kurama lay on his back panting as Naruto's excited shouts filled his mind. That was awesome. So cool. Kurama panted while splayed out on the ground. Glad you liked it. How were you able to see it? I went back into the cave and when you got excited, I was able to see. Naruto explained in his high-pitched fox kid voice. Kurama already felt his body healing from where the antler impaled him. Interesting. Our senses are merging now that so much chakra has passed through the seal. I will work on making it permanent for you, Kit. Thanks, Papa. Naruto replied flippantly. Kurama's breath hitched in his chest at the name. He knew that he began to see the kid as his own, but this was the first time that Naruto had called him that. Sure thing, Kit. Did you feel how I was able to suck in my chakra and hide my aura? That will be an important lesson for you. Right now, you're radiating an overwhelming chakra and you need to learn how, so suck it in. Naruto his fox head to the side, okay, why? Kurama laughed at the inquisitive nature of the child. He had really started to reemerge over the past month as he no longer felt the fear that he previously shouldered. Before Kurama could respond to Naruto, the dog-masked Anbu appeared standing over him. Kurama looked up at the guardian while panting for a minute before he opened the conversation. Can I help you, doggy? Kurama asked while using the name to irritate the dog-masked Anbu. Kurama reveled in the spike in agitation that flared through the Anbu's chakra. Dog sighed, Naruto, you know that you shouldn't do this. Kurama his human head to the side while still supine, why? And if I am not supposed to do it, then why didn't you stop me before I killed it? Dog looked over the tattered state of Naruto's clothes and he looked at the wounds that were already healing. Dog chuckled behind his mask before he shrugged and responded, I didn't think you would be able to. You should get your food from the stores, like a normal kid. Kurama couldn't help the flare of anger that lit up his blood-red eyes. Oh yeah, silly me, I should just go buy it like some normal kid. You, doggy. Dog's shoulders slumped as he realized the stupidity of his statement. Well, you could get free lunch at the academy. Kurama scoffed. Yay me. For the price of enduring hate and standing in the hallway, I can get a snack for lunch. Thanks, but no thanks. Dog sighed. Naruto, if you don't go to the academy then you won't be able to be a ninja. Kurama shrugged. Fine by me. Kurama said this to get a read on how the dog Anbu would feel about it. Sure enough, he felt regret and a lingering anger well up. Dog reeled in his anger and calmed his tone. It wasn't the boy's fault. Naruto, I think we need to go see the Hokage. Kurama growled at the thought. Why? Because he wants you to become a ninja. Why? Because why? Kurama persisted. He wanted the stupid mortals to spit it out already. Dog sighed. I can't tell you. Kurama scoffed and crossed his arms. His body was healed and feeling better, but he was comfortable. I don't want to see the Hokage. All he ever does is lie to me. Dog tensed up at that. Naruto. Kurama relented on his obstinance. It was clear that Dog was torn between some personal feelings and his obligation to the Hokage. Save it, Doggy. If the old bastard wants to lie to my face, then let's go. But you are sealing up my kill before we do anything. Kurama was actively avoiding the Hokage. The first meeting did not go well, and it was clear that the Hokage could care less about what the boy wanted. It was obvious that the Hokage was using Naruto for his own means and cared little about his happiness. Thus, a game of actively avoiding the Hokage or ignoring him when Kurama was forced to tolerate his presence began. It was a game that caused more tension with each meeting and things were coming to a boiling point. Kurama had a feeling that today might be the boiling point. Dog arrived with Kurama in the Hokage's office, and he saw the three elders were in a conference with the Hokage. He immediately knelt respectfully and apologized for interrupting. The four geriatrics were taking in Naruto's messy state and the clear signs of blood that saturated the edges of his torn clothing. Kurama couldn't blame them. He looked more like a wild boy than a civilized shinobi in training. Naruto, what happened to you? Hiruzen asked while frowning. Hunting. Kurama replied simply and Naruto giggled through the mental link. Kurama guessed that the link was finally starting to stabilize between the two of them. Hiruzen looked to Dog for an explanation and Dog provided one. He stalked and killed a buck in the forest with just a kunai. This earned analytical looks from the four old farts, which was expected. Kurama also felt a sense of pride and greed coming from the bandaged one. Why are you hunting deer, Naruto? Hiruzen asked harshly. That is much too dangerous for someone without training. Kurama's eyes hardened and he glared down the Hokage. I know your Anbu report to you, so quit playing dumb. I can't get food within the village, so I find my own. Koharu frowned at the disrespect. Naruto, you need to respect your Hokage. Kurama's head turned to the old lady. He sensed a gentleness to her chakra, but it was hidden behind a hardened resentment and firm will. Udatain-san, my options are to provide for myself or starve. I choose the prior. Danzo's lone eye crinkled in delight. He could use this boy. Naruto, why do you not go to the academy? Surely you could receive training there that would make providing for yourself easier. Kurama frowned at the geezer. Maybe if they were willing to teach, but let us put aside false pretenses. You all know what I experience when your Anbu drag me there and it is quite frankly a waste of my time and theirs. Hiruzen frowned at the statement. He knew it was true, but he needed the boy on the path of the shinobi. Naruto, that is the only way for you to become a shinobi of the leaf. Kurama shrugged. So what? The edges of Danzo's lips were pulled downward at this, and Kurama was able to feel his disappointment. It was so intense that it almost turned to resentment, but strangely, it wasn't directed at Kurama. Naruto, the shinobi path is the best path for you. Kurama suppressed his growl and addressed the bandaged elder. Maybe, but the academy clearly won't treat me fairly. Let me ask you this, Shimura-san, how would you define insanity? This piqued the interest of all listening in the room and Danzo mulled the question over for a couple seconds before responding. I often told my old trainees that do the same thing over and over again while expecting different results was the definition of insanity. Kurama nodded and snapped his fingers. Good, then we are on the same page. Danzo actually looked surprised and his head to the side. What do you mean? If I repeatedly go to the academy to waste my time in the hallways and suffer the judgment of the teachers, then that will not lead me down the path of the shinobi. It is a waste of my time and their hatred. So, why would I keep going back? Kurama asked the four old farts. Kurama enjoyed the variety of emotions that he could feel. Danzo was a subdued mixture of surprised and proud. Koharu was resentful but with a bright spot of pride. Homura was mostly disappointed, but Kurama couldn't tell what he was disappointed by. Dog was proud, sad and mostly regretful. Hiruzen was mainly apathetic and upset. It was clear to Kurama that the old Hokage wasn't happy about the way things turned out. Hiruzen took a puff of his pipe and mulled on it. He looked to his elders for assistance and sighed when it got him nowhere. Naruto, I need you to become a shinobi. Kurama his head to the side as the same old song and dance began once more. Why? He asked simply. Hiruzen sighed and puffed on his pipe once more. I cannot tell you that. Kurama scoffed. Then this ends the same way. See, definition of insanity. You might want to get that checked out, Hokage-san. Hiruzen frowned at the jab. The boy had become so much more obstinate ever since that night. His eyes changed too, and he had gotten nowhere with the boy. Naruto. Kurama interrupted him. Look, old man, I have a deer to skin and gut, and I don't want the meat to go bad. If we are just going to do this dance all over again, can I go? Hiruzen sighed and waved him off with the back of his hand. Kakashi took him and the two disappeared in a shunshin. The Hokage turned to his elder council. See what I am dealing with here. Danzo frowned at the pathetic statement, a brilliant boy with unlimited potential that you are shackling with the restraints of inferiority. Kaharu coughed in surprise at the direct statement of her fellow elder. That was brash but correct. The boy will not receive the required training within the normal system. Hiruzen threw his hands up in a petty display of frustration. What would you have me do? Give him to me. I will train him. Danzo replied simply. No. Hiruzen replied obstinately. Why not, Hiruzen? Homura asked. He will receive far better training and even have a better quality of life. Hiruzen scoffed. I am not letting Naruto become one of Danzo's emotionless drones. The argument persisted in the same way it had for the past 8 years. Hiruzen adamantly denying Danzo, Homura and Kaharu protesting mildly on Danzo's behalf. Hiruzen not taking the advice or counsel of his elders without providing proper reasoning. It all served to